Nordic countries consistently rank at the top of the global happiness index. And it's not that surprising if we consider their high standards of living. Excellent healthcare, education, a strong social safety net. Yeah, okay, all those sound pretty damn great. I can't lie. But there is a less shiny aspect that is not talked about too often. I've now traveled to all the Nordic countries, minus the incredibly tiny populated Faroe Islands, and I've noted time and time again just how difficult it can be to make friends in the Nordics, and frankly, how lonely it can get if you've just relocated here. But there is one country that stands out on this list. Sweden. When surveyed, only 33% of foreigners said that they made a close Swedish friend. When asked how long it takes to connect with Swedes, the second most common answer was a year or more, with most foreigners stating they have yet to make a friend. And it makes sense. Swedes are notoriously reserved and it can be incredibly hard to crack through that shell. But as someone who has spent the last couple of years researching Scandinavia to write the book Sex Before Coffee, I knew that even before stepping foot onto the Swedish soil and talking to people, that the reasons went way deeper than that. And I'm going to go through all of those reasons, so stay tuned. But first, I was curious to know, how do Swedes feel about their social circle? I mean, do they have a hard time making friends, and do they actually feel lonely? I went to Stockholm, the more reserved capital, and Gothenburg, its friendlier counterpart, to find out just that. Do you think Sweden is a difficult place to make friends?
Yes. When you start to talk to people, they are nice, but people tend to like stick to their own group. Yeah.
How many Swedish friends do you have at the...
1, 2. Have you had issues finding friends here?
God, yeah. It's so hard. And I'm quite extroverted. I tend to get on with most people.
Мы тут где-то около 13 лет живем.
У вас есть вообще друзья шведы?
У меня больше, да. 3 человека.
По шведским стандартам это уже много.
How would you say in your experience it is making friends in Sweden?
It's pretty difficult, especially the older that you get.
At least for me, 25 plus, it started getting more difficult, like finding new friends and stuff. I still have my core base of friends. It's not very often that I get new friends or like talk to strangers.
Do you have a lot of friends here that are Swedish, would you say?
I do, but people are still friends with their childhood friends, so it's kind of like cheating almost, you know, because I also still have them.
No, I think you can definitely make friends in Sweden, but I think Swedish people are shy. They're a little bit closed up, and a lot of people, they have their fixed, the friendship circle from college or even before that.
I don't very often make friends of like, oh, I met this guy on the subway or like at the gym.
I'd say you and your friends, some of you are hugely different, but you're still true, these are my best friends, and I don't think you've ever considered, should they, not that they shouldn't be, I love your friends, but I don't think you've ever considered, should they still be my best friends? Are we still aligned in values and hobbies or anything like that? But because you've got so much shared history, none of you care. It's very common in Sweden to meet grown adults who are still hanging out with people they were at high school with. It's
my
less.
dad still hangs out with his high school friends, like when he's quite often.
Do you think people genuinely don't need new friends, or they're just nervous and shy around talking to new people?
They totally need friends. I think Sweden is the most loneliest country in the... some studies showed that it was... We need people. We need friends.
Do you personally, this is a sad question, but do you feel like you feel lonely, or do you know a lot of people that are?
I would say yes, sometimes. I think that's because of the society, how it's built, and I think everyone feels lonely sometimes.
I think maybe we look happy, but I don't think we are happy.
Yeah, I'm becoming happier. I've struggled a lot with mental health issues in the past.
Taboo.
It's a taboo in Sweden to talk about, like, I kind of feel lonely.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think that everybody wants to look good. It's like everybody's biggest secret, but everybody has it.
I don't feel lonely at the moment, I have to say. I think that maybe I'm a bit afraid to feel lonely when I'm older. When I look at my parents, like, they don't have that much social engagement anymore. But they don't feel lonely. I think they're quite pleased with their situation. But I'm afraid I'm gonna feel lonely.
I don't have the feeling of being lonely, but I would say that I wish that I had more sense of community, even with my friends, and I'm so happy with them. It's still like we are our little islands, our separate islands. I think that's the individualism that is coming really like into place, that you think first about like my schedule, and then I will see if I can fit you in my schedule.
I think that Sweden has the biggest number in the world procentually in depression. But I think it's because we kind of have it too good when it comes to safety, and we don't know what pure happiness is, and it's just become a habit of working and spinning around the wheel.
So here it was, the first 2 reasons why Sweden is such a difficult place to make friends. Sweden ranks at 71 on its individualism scale. Here, there's a huge importance put on being self-autonomous and independent. In the 70s, Swedes established something called the Swedish model, or the Nordic model, that helped establish a society where no one had to be forced to be in any relationships because of economic needs. Children now didn't have to depend on their parents, women didn't have to stay with their men, and the elderly needed not live with their children. What has emerged is the Swedish mindset of be reliant. Don't rely on me, and I won't rely on you. While this is great in theory, this Swedish mindset really hinders people's ability to connect with one another, which is why the islands analogy that you just heard has really connected with me personally, because it just made so much sense. It sounds ridiculous to an outsider, but making friends in Sweden and in Scandinavia at large stops in high school, which means that if you are 18 years old and you haven't yet made friends in Sweden, then you're kind of screwed. Swedes typically like the comfort of knowing someone for life. So even if you change as a person, your interests change, and you have literally zero in common with Jonas from grade 6, you still hang out regularly because you have. It's the comfortable thing to do, and Swedes typically like staying in their comfort zone. And even once you have your close friends, Swedish friendships can look quite different to an outsider.
The way we hang out is not so spontaneous. It's kind of like everyone is acting as if they have 3 children at home and have so important lives.
If it's after work, work stops at 6. No, at 4, I'm sorry. After 4, you have all the time in the world to see your friends, to go to dinner, to have a drink. What do you do with those hours? So I don't understand why people just waste them on sitting at home and recharging, but they do that every day.
A lot of people sort of keeping themselves to themselves. The initial impression of that is that it seems like people are either rude, ignorant, arrogant, unsociable.
Swedish people like their space.
Yeah, when you come to like this park, you're not gonna sit too close to anyone. Like,
no,
you're in your own group and you don't really talk to other people that much.
And if you do it, it feels very American. When they say that they will meet with you, but they have to go home early, you only get a little slot of time to hang out with them. Like, you know, I really prefer to just not.
You don't have it from when you're little, that you just like casually hang out spontaneously with like a big group of people. Most people maybe don't do that when they're growing up. Then it's like a bad cycle, because if you don't do it, it becomes awkward. And if you're awkward, you don't want to do it, and you get stuck like this.
I just got back to Stockholm actually. I lived in the US. I think the people in the US are way better at making sure that the people that you meet actually become friends, like inviting them over, do things outside of the activities where you meet them in.
Speaking of space, even a capital city like Stockholm has so much of it. I got off the metro in what's considered quite a central part of the city, and I found myself in a forest.
Like, look behind me, guys. Center of Stockholm, everyone.
But here are a few other reasons that Swedes can be so hard to get to know. If you've ever heard about the peaches versus coconut theory, Swedes are your typical coconut. It can be incredibly frustrating to crack through that shell. It can take years, in fact, to get close to someone, but once you're there, you will find a friend for life. But the process itself is quite frustrating. On the contrast, Americans are your typical peach. Very, very soft on the outside, while there is a pit in the center of it, but that's a whole other video. Now, I really wanted to share the next one with you because I think it is absolutely groundbreaking. I cannot take credit for it. I didn't come up with it, but here it is. This is something called negative versus positive politeness theory. Now, in North America, Latin America, and quite a lot of parts of the world, we practice what is called positive politeness. If we see someone who is completely alone at a party, we might approach them and say, hey, you look like you're not really having fun. Do you want to join our group? Or if you see somebody struggling with bags, it is just the polite thing to do to say, hey, do you want some help with that? Politeness means reaching out, offering support, and being friendly and connecting in that way. Now, in Scandinavia, politeness signifies something else. Here, it's polite not to inconvenience. It's polite not to interfere. It's polite to let them be.
We're very self-aware, I would say. Yeah. So we think very much about how we behave towards other people. I think that's a big part of it. Like, we're afraid of just letting loose.
Swedes are far less confrontational, or if they are, it's very much like, let's have a very measured, calm, balanced conversation without getting our emotions involved and regulating properly, and it's much healthier, like it's much more civilized. I like it, but also it's taken a big adjustment.
I spent a year in Swedish workplace, and there's just sort of this very sort of high level, trivial conversations going on about, you know, activities after work or the weekend, and then but there's no depth to it. The moment you do go there, then there's a kind of receptiveness to it, or there's a fear, and then there's a moving away. But that's totally fine.
There is a discomfort with confrontation and being forward.
100%.
Right? Like when you notice that someone is stirring the pot, people are like, you know, making faces, and you can see them actually physically move away. Really? Yeah, and like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be saying that.
I see, like too loud, too emotional, right? That's like the whole thing.
Oh yeah, that's just crazy. If you're too emotional.
If you're emotional, you're crazy. That's the equivalent.
It depends what type of emotion. But if you're just, you know, if your emotions are outside and you act on every emotion, that would be crazy.
Americans are loud, and like Southern Europeans are dramatic, and you know, British are a bit more quiet. But certainly
not as quiet as us.
No, and at home we're not. That's where you can, I think, be more expressive and certainly passionate about things, whatever. And again, talking over you were like, you have interrupted me, and like very, very calmly, like you actually just interrupted me, Ellie, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, but like, did I?
We were traveling in America last summer, and that was very like when people were talking, like someone would interrupt you with a slightly related story, and someone would talk about a completely unrelated story, and then you can't really keep track of the conversation.
And I didn't really know. Sorry, interrupted you there. Yeah, no, I don't think I noticed the interruption so much, and I found it so funny because we'd get back to our hostel or whatever at night, and you'd be like, oh my god, everyone's interrupting everyone, and they weren't even interrupting about a related topic. They'd just talk about something completely different over the top, and I was like, oh.
It also gets progressively louder when they're talking. Like everyone has to like one up.
Growing up, I think that people are so worried about what people think of them. So that's why they start to close up. If you show too much of yourself, there's too much to judge. So if you're acting just like everybody else, there's really nothing to judge. Why don't you hear, you know, parents and grandparents, oh, what do you care what they think? They're stupid. And here it's like, well, maybe you should change the type of things that you wear so other kids don't mock you, or maybe you should change this or that.
So like conform to what the society is doing.
Yeah,
right?
And it's a pretty clear type of person. Like not too loud, not too colorful. Times have changed.
Screw you all.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, you see in summer that people are dressing, but they didn't do that before.
How you're being perceived is very critical in terms of like social acceptability and just general acceptability. And I think what that creates is a culture of where everyone does on the surface behave well, but there's also a lot of suppressed emotions going on.
In the UK, Australia, or New Zealand, there is something that is called the tall poppy syndrome. In the Netherlands, it's doe normaal, or be normal. Act normal. Being normal is crazy enough. The Scandinavian version of that is Janteloven, or the law of Jante, which means that don't think that you're more special than anyone else. Don't think that you're better than anyone else. Be just like everyone else. While most young Swedes will argue with me to say that this mentality is now being phased out, that people no longer live by the law of Jante, and I will agree with that. Definitely things are changing, but I find that law of Jante still does such a great job of describing the Swedish mentality. There are many videos done about the Swedes looking through the peephole to see if there's a neighbor waiting for an elevator. There are so many jokes made about Swedes not wanting to interact with strangers, and I find it's hilariously true. What might be a nice conversation with a stranger in North America would be deemed incredibly uncomfortable for the Swedes. It's just not something that they do. Because there's a real fear of losing face, of standing out, of being judged, of looking like that weird person that decided to talk to a stranger, and nobody wants to be that person. So knowing all of that, I wanted to get the Swedes' reaction on something that we North Americans live and breathe, and that is everyone's loved small talk. So this is something really common in Canada. I'll go into an elevator with someone and I'll say like, oh, I really like your shirt that you're wearing. What's your like inner reaction to that?
I get happy. Yeah, the comeback can be quite hard because you have to say something good to the person.
What about your shirt?
Exactly. Yeah. They are so not used to talk to strangers, so then we don't know what to say.
No, I love it. I get so happy. I often tell myself that I should do that kind of things, but I don't do it.
So I kind of find it, I'm thinking of this Swedish word called trevligt, like pleasant, sort of. It can also feel awkward, like especially if I can sense that, oh, this person just wants to get out of here, kind of. And if I myself feel like, oh, we're really just talking because we have to talk, and it doesn't feel genuine, then I can feel uncomfortable and I don't like it.
I have so many friends, and also with myself, if I go to another country, if I live abroad, then I will start acting a different way, but then when I come back here, I will go back to the norms that is here.
Why?
I think comfort and the risk of being perceived more as strange, even though I just said it's not strange. If I'm sitting next to a stranger here in Sweden, it's feels like there's a wall between us, and even like on the bus, even if I'm like touching someone on the bus.
We don't have the need to talk to strangers, but when we do, it's perfectly fine. We're like everyone else. We just don't have those natural small talk ignitions, or what you say. Maybe in a way we're actually better at making friends because we skip a lot of the small talk. We often go straight to the deep stuff, which makes you bond even more with people.
Emotional expression and confrontation is incredibly uncomfortable for the Swedes, and some might consider it a real no-go. A Swedish theologist once wrote that in the 80s, in the maternity wards of Sweden, women in labor groaned as little as possible when they gave birth, and then would nervously ask, did I make a lot of noise? If they found out they didn't, they would feel much better about what is a pretty painful natural process, where yelling is kind of a part of a deal. And this is of course part of the reason why the Swedes love to drink. If you go out partying with the Swedes, it may feel like you've made a whole bunch of new friends, so it may be incredibly frustrating to wait for the message the next day that never comes. Keep in mind that Swedes tend to overpromise a lot when they drink. So at this point of the video, you may be thinking, man, why did I click on this video? All it does is list the reasons why it's so hard to make friends here. I'm never gonna make a friend in Sweden. So while I cannot tell you if this is true or not, I can tell you one thing: attitude plays a huge role in life, and especially when it comes to connection. And Sweden may be a more difficult place to make friends, but that does not mean that it is out of the question.
Какой шведский менталитет для вас?
Холодные люди.
Он немножко необычный, то есть люди в некотором плане, может быть, они всегда улыбчивые здесь, но с ними тяжело войти в контакт.
Да, мне кажется, скорее более как двуличная улыбчивость, так как бы лицо улыбаются, как бы именно на более такой вот как бы дружественный контакт они не всегда готовы.
Когда уже как-то начинаешь, если получится влиться в какую-то компанию, то ты уже начинаешь видеть эту разницу, они тебя начинают воспринимать как своего. Но вот именно преодолеть этот барьер — это самое сложное, я бы сказал, в этих отношениях.
Да, требуется время и много усилий, чтобы добиться их симпатии и доверия.
Но не слишком большое давление.
The key to living in Sweden and developing a friend network is to get inside of the network and then be introduced once you're within it, right? Because otherwise it's really difficult to get inside the net. But once you've been introduced, then things get really easy because you're invited to places and then people know you and you're a friend of this person, which automatically assumes you're safe.
Invite them to something because they are gonna sit and think like, oh, maybe it's strange if I invite someone, so then they will just not invite you, but they actually want you to be there. So if you want to become friends with them, then you have to take the step. I think that's a good one.
Or give them alcohol maybe.
Also good.
Yeah, they might be that. So.
A girl I became kind of super close friends with in my year abroad, we only became good friends because I realized, okay, you have to get them drunk, and then when they're drunk they have to commit to going out and doing skating for the day or whatever it is that they'd never agree to do with me sober. So actually this girl was like, you have to come and visit after Christmas, like in my hometown up north, and I was like, she doesn't mean this, but she doesn't realize that drunk. So I was like, yeah, Yeah, I can be the international.
She woke
no,
up the
we've
day after
discussed
and
this.
was like, oh.
She did. I was like, yeah, text me now or I'll forget it. So she messaged me on Facebook. The next morning, I replied to it like, oh, I'd love to come and stay with you. And she was like, no, what have I done? But I had to go through with it. She'd message, and then we became best friends, and it was lovely. And she's wonderful, and we're still friends. I felt so rude and uncomfortable doing that, but I was like, it's not going to happen.
It's
otherwise.
now or never.
Yeah, I was like, I have to use my like foreigner pass.
Well, one thing I've noticed that Swedes really respond very, very well to is a sort of being genuine, being yourself. And what I mean by that is like being a little bit more willing to show your emotions, because they kind of crave that, because it's not really socially accepted within their own sort of circles.
I've been realizing that the more outgoing that I get is also like an effect I realized. And so now I kind of start changing my mind, like, oh, maybe people aren't that reserved after all, you know?
Maybe, yeah. They just need the permission to,
kind of.
to
yeah.
talk. When you do get to that point where you are friends with a Swede, try not to take it personally when they don't invite you to hang out with their other group of friends. They also like to compartmentalize their friend groups. So there may be a hobby group, there may be some other activity group, there may be the study group, and there may be a work group. And all of those are kept separate. And this is something just to know when you're trying to make friends and wondering, why am I not invited to something else that Jonas was invited to? Why did I get excluded out of that? And this is why. I came to Sweden in June, around midsummer, when the weather was at its peak. People were enjoying their summer holidays, and it was hot, guys. It was 30 degrees, and I'm not even lying that that was the hottest week I experienced in Europe for 2 months. And that made it incredibly easy to not only talk to people in the parks, but to approach people, because, of course, I was talking to the summer Swedes and not the winter Swedes. I later watched a video about another girl going to Sweden, and she had so much difficulty talking to Swedish people because she came in the winter. Now, I didn't have that experience. I found that approaching in Sweden was the easiest thing in the world. I kid you not, at some point, I was in Stockholm and Gothenburg completely on my own, walking around the parks, approaching people and asking them to do an interview. And 98% of the people said yes. This gave me so much confidence. I literally felt like I was invincible. Confidence that later got crushed when I went to Estonia and realized that wasn't really the case in other parts of the world. Whether the Swedes were excited because it was the summer, whether they were just eager to connect, whether maybe some of them felt lonely and in need of this connection with a stranger, I don't know. What I know is that people were very receptive, and that was such an incredible feeling. Thank you, Sweden. Now, what helped me was understanding the Swedish mindset. I would approach in a friendly yet casual manner. I would show genuine interest without pushing it, and the key here is the phrase overdoing it. Now, keep in mind, there's nothing worse to the Swedish mindset than overdoing it. Whether that's with your energy, with dishing out 1,000,001 compliments, with asking them way too many questions, or in any way just being too much. And they would label that as fake, not genuine, not real. So if you are interested in talking to someone, remember to keep your interest casual, relaxed. Don't go too much right away, because that's just going to scare someone off. And if I were rejected, I would not take it personally, because I understood the Swedish mindset. The rejection didn't say anything about me. It was rather about the person that didn't really want to engage, and that was fine. Now, of course, I didn't live in Sweden, so my advice comes from someone who was only there for 10 days. Now, if you're living there, the situation is, of course, going to be different and potentially a lot more frustrating. But funny enough, for my last interview in Gothenburg, I got a little bit nervous to approach this group of guys who were hanging out. Now, you have seen them in this video. I was really nervous about being rejected for some reason, but I kind of pushed through it, approached them, and funny enough, we had such a wonderful conversation, and they invited me later to join them for a session of acro yoga in the park, which I did. And I felt that that was such a wonderful ending to my trip to Sweden, where instead of fearing rejection and thinking, what are they going to think of me, Swedish style, I just kind of went for it with my genuine interest, with wanting to get to know a new group of people. And in the end, we ended up connecting, and I still keep in touch with some of them. My only advice is, don't come in the winter.